almost lost you both. Please, give me a chance to make this right.
You don't get second chances with me, Felix, only with her.
Before we begin the story, let us know where you're watching from by leaving a comment below. If you enjoy this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. Have a wonderful day. Enjoy the story. The evening air carried the scent of jasmine as Elise hurried across Central Park, her delicate fingers wrapped around the invitation she'd received just yesterday. At 20, she radiated quiet beauty, her deep brown eyes holding wisdom beyond her years, her skin the color of polished mahogany gleaming under the setting sun. Tonight was the annual Spring Charity Gala, an event where New York's elite gathered to pretend philanthropy was their passion rather than a tax write-off. Elise wasn't supposed to be there as a guest. She had been hired as an assistant to the event coordinator, a last-minute position that would help cover next month's tuition at Columbia University. Her literature professor had recommended her, knowing her impeccable attention to detail and captivating way with words would impress the organizers. The Plaza Hotel loomed ahead, its golden lights beckoning like stars brought down to earth. Elise straightened her simple emerald dress, a thrift store treasure. She'd altered herself and took a deep breath before ascending the steps. Inside, crystal chandeliers cast diamonds of light across marble floors, champagne flowed like water, and laughter tinkled like the ice in expensive whiskey glasses. Elise moved through the crowd with practiced invisibility, checking centerpieces and ensuring the auction items were perfectly displayed. Across the room stood Felix, 35, and devastating in his tailored tuxedo, his chiseled features and piercing blue eyes having graced magazine covers across the country. Self-made and unapologetically ambitious, he'd transformed a single innovative idea into Carver Technologies, a multi-million-dollar empire that had revolutionized renewable energy storage. Tonight, however, he looked thoroughly bored as a blonde socialite clung to his arm, her red lips moving continuously while his eyes wandered. It happened in an instant, the collision of two souls never meant to meet. Elise, backing away from a freshly arranged orchid display, bumped into a waiter. The tray of champagne flutes teetered precariously. Without thinking, she reached out, steadying both the waiter and the tray in one graceful movement. Impressive reflexes came a deep voice that sent inexplicable shivers down her spine. Turning, Elise found herself looking up into those famous blue eyes. In person, they held something. The magazines never captured a profound loneliness, carefully concealed behind confidence. "Just good balance," she replied, surprised by her own steady voice. "Balance is underrated." His smile transformed his face, erasing the boredom that had lingered there moments before. "I'm Felix. I know who you are, Mr. Carver," she said, unable to stop the slight curve of her lips. "Everyone does. And you are." He leaned closer as if they were sharing secrets in a room full of people who suddenly didn't matter. "Elise, I'm working tonight. That makes two of us." He gestured around the opulent room with a barely concealed eye roll. "Though I suspect your work has more purpose than mine." Something in his candor disarmed her. This wasn't the polished charm the tabloids described, but something more genuine, a moment of real connection amidst the artificial glitter. "The auction will raise money for children's literacy programs," she reminded him gently. "That seems purposeful enough." His eyes widened slightly as if surprised by her gentle challenge. "You're right, of course. Sometimes I forget to see beyond the performative aspects of these events." A blonde woman appeared at his side, placing a possessive hand on his arm. "Felix, darling, the Hendersons are asking for you." Her eyes flicked dismissively over Elise. "The staff shouldn't be bothering you." "Serena," his voice cooled several degrees. "Miss Thompson was providing me with some much-needed perspective, and she's not staff. She's clearly the most intelligent person in this room." Elise felt her cheeks warm at his unexpected defense. "I should get back to work," she murmured, stepping away. "Wait." His hand reached for hers, a brief electric touch. "Will you be here all evening?" She nodded, puzzled by his interest. "Good." The single word held promise that made her heart flutter traitorously. Throughout the evening, she felt his eyes following her. When the auction began, she watched from the shadows as he outbid everyone for a first-edition collection of Maya Angelou's poetry, his paddle rising with casual determination until no one dared challenge him. As the night wound down and guests began departing, Elise discovered the poetry collection on the table. She was clearing a note tucked inside the cover. "These words deserve to be appreciated by someone who understands their true value. Have dinner with me tomorrow, Felix." Below was his personal number. Her practical mind warned against it. Men like Felix didn't seriously pursue women like her. Yet something deeper, more intuitive, recognized a kindred spirit beneath his wealthy exterior. The next evening found them at a small Italian restaurant in the village, far from paparazzi and prying eyes. Over candlelight and wine for him and sparkling water for her, they discovered connections neither expected. He confessed his passion for literature, a secret love that had sustained him through a challenging childhood. She shared her dreams of becoming a writer who gave voice to those often silenced. "You're nothing like I expected," he admitted. As they walked through Washington Square Park afterward, the night air wrapping around them like a cocoon. "And what did you expect?" she asked, genuinely curious. Someone impressed by wealth, interested in what I could provide. His honesty was disarming. "Instead, you challenged me within 30 seconds of meeting me." Elise laughed, the sound like music in the quiet park. Disappointed, he stopped walking, turning to face her. In the moonlight, his expression was stripped of pretense, revealing a vulnerability that stole her breath. "Enchanted," he whispered. When he kissed her beneath the arch, time suspended. It wasn't the kiss of a playboy or a man accustomed to taking what he wanted. It was questioning, reverent, the kiss of someone who had found something precious and unexpected. That night marked the beginning of a love neither had been looking for, but both had been waiting for their entire lives. Over the following weeks, Felix pursued Elise with a single-minded devotion that transformed them both. He sent flowers to her tiny apartment, not extravagant arrangements, but thoughtfully selected blooms that reminded him of her. He left books with passages marked that made him think of her. He listened, truly listened, when she spoke of her family in South Carolina, her mother's struggle with lupus, her father's unwavering support of her education despite limited means. Each date revealed another layer of connection. Elise discovered the man behind the millionaire, someone who remembered the names of every employee who funded scholarships anonymously, who still carried the worn library card from his childhood. And Felix discovered in Elise everything wealth could not buy: authenticity, compassion, and a wisdom that saw through all his carefully constructed walls. "I think I've been waiting for you my whole life," he confessed one evening as they lay on a blanket in his private rooftop garden counting stars. "I just didn't know what I was waiting for until I found you." As spring blossomed into summer, so did their love, deep, transformative, and utterly unstoppable. Neither could have imagined the storms that lay ahead, nor the strength they would need to weather them. Chapter 2. A Love Against All Odds. Summer days melted into each other as Elise and Felix's romance blossomed with an intensity that surprised them both. Their worlds couldn't have been more different. Felix's penthouse overlooking Central Park was a universe away from Elise's tiny shared apartment in Washington Heights. Yet when they were together, those differences dissolved into insignificance. "Tell me about growing up in South Carolina," Felix asked one evening as they shared a picnic on his private terrace, the Manhattan skyline glittering around them like a jewelry box open to the night. Elise's eyes softened with memories. "Our house was small but always full of love. My mother taught kindergarten and my father worked 2 jobs so I could take dance lessons and have the books I constantly begged for." She smiled, remembering. "Every Sunday we'd gather at my grandmother's house, cousins, aunts, uncles, everyone squeezing around tables, pushed together, passing collard greens and cornbread, and stories that got more elaborate with each telling." Felix listened, enraptured by this glimpse into a childhood so different from his own. "It sounds beautiful," he said softly, "like something from a book I read but never experienced." "What about your family?" she asked, noticing the shadow that crossed his face. He was quiet for a moment, his fingers tracing patterns on her palm. "My father left when I was 4. My mother worked herself to exhaustion, raising me alone." His voice grew distant. "She died just as my company took off. Sometimes I think the universe has a cruel sense of timing." Elise's heart ached for him. She leaned over, pressing her lips gently to his. "She would be proud of the man you've become." He looked at her with wonder. Would she? "Sometimes I'm not sure who I've become in pursuit of success." "I see who you are," Elise whispered behind all the magazine covers and press conferences. "I see you, Felix." Those words, simple yet profound, broke something open in him. That night he held her like she was his lifeline, his body expressing what words couldn't yet form. As summer progressed, Felix introduced Elise to his World Charity Gala's, exclusive restaurant openings, weekend trips to the Hamptons. She navigated these new experiences with a natural grace that impressed even his most judgmental associates, yet it was clear to anyone watching that Elise remained untransformed by wealth or status. She engaged sincerely with everyone she met, from CEOs to the staff who served their meals, her genuine warmth, a stark contrast to the calculated networking that characterized most social interactions in Felix's circle. Not everyone welcomed her presence. Serena, who had long considered herself the natural choice for Felix's eventual bride, watched their relationship with thinly veiled contempt. "She's very young, isn't she?" Serena commented during a benefit at the Met, her voice dripping with false concern. "And so unworldly. One has to wonder what exactly you see in her." Felix's eyes hardened. "I see authenticity, intelligence, and a heart uncorrupted by cynicism. Rare qualities in our circles, wouldn't you agree?" Serena's smile tightened, but she retreated temporarily defeated. The true challenge came when Elise invited Felix to meet her family. The trip to South Carolina revealed the depth of her family's concerns. "He's 15 years older than you, Elise," her father said during a private moment on the porch, his weathered hands clasped tightly. "Men like him with money power, they don't see the world the way we do. I'm worried he'll hurt you." "Dad, he's not what the tabloids paint him to be," Elise insisted. "He's kind and thoughtful. He values the same things we do. Honesty, hard work, compassion." Her father studied her face, seeing the love shining there. "Your heart has always been too big, too trusting. Just promise me you'll be careful." Inside, Felix was helping Elise's mother prepare dinner. His suit jacket, discarded sleeves, rolled up as he chopped vegetables with surprising skill. "My Elise doesn't care about fancy things," her mother said, quietly testing him. "Her happiness comes from deeper sources." Felix nodded his movements, never pausing. "That's precisely why I love her. Mrs. Thompson, she's shown me that everything I thought mattered doesn't, and everything I never considered matters profoundly." By the end of the weekend, while her family's reservations hadn't completely disappeared, they had softened watching Felix and Elise together, the way his eyes followed her, filled with adoration, the natural way they moved in sync, the respect evident in every interaction. Even her skeptical father had to admit there was something genuine between them. Upon returning to New York, their relationship intensified. Felix found himself rearranging meetings to spend afternoons in the park with Elise. She began keeping clothes at his penthouse, her literature textbooks, mingling with his financial reports on the coffee table. They created their own world within the chaos of Manhattan. Sunday mornings spent reading the paper in bed, discovering hole-in-the-wall restaurants where no one recognized Felix. Long conversations about everything and nothing as night turned to dawn. On a crisp September evening, exactly 3 months after they met, Felix took Elise to the Metropolitan Museum of Art. After hours of privilege arranged through a substantial donation, they wandered the empty galleries, their footsteps echoing against marble floors, the greatest artworks in history, their silent companions. In the Temple of Dendur, moonlight streaming through the glass ceiling, Felix stopped. His typically confident demeanor gave way to something almost boyish, vulnerable. "Elise," he began, his voice uncharacteristically unsteady. "Before you, my life was colorless. I had success but no joy. Achievements but no purpose." He took her hands in his. "You've shown me what matters. How to see beauty in small moments. How to love without conditions or expectations." He lowered himself to one knee, and Elise's heart thundered in her chest. "I know it seems fast," he continued, producing a black velvet box, "but when you find your heart's match, time becomes irrelevant." He opened the box to reveal a stunning emerald ring surrounded by diamonds, the deep green reminiscent of the dress she'd worn the night they met. "Elise, would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" Tears blurred her vision as emotions overwhelmed her. This man, brilliant, complex, loving, wanted forever with her. Despite their differences, despite her family's concerns, despite the raised eyebrows their relationship had already provoked, she knew with absolute certainty that her heart belonged with his. "Yes," she whispered. Then louder her voice, echoing through the ancient temple. "Yes, Felix, I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger with trembling hands, before rising to capture her lips in a kiss that tasted of promises and possibilities. As they stood embracing beneath the soaring ceilings of the temple, transported from Egypt stone by stone, just as they had been carried to each other across seemingly insurmountable differences, neither could imagine anything but happiness in their future. News of their engagement exploded across social media and tabloids the next morning. "Carver billions to Wednesday college student," screamed the headlines. Speculation about Elise's motives ran rampant. Old photos were dredged up. Acquaintances offered exclusive insights into her character, and overnight her private life became public property. "Ignore it," Felix advised, deleting the news alerts from her phone. "They can't touch what we have." Elise tried to embrace his confidence, but the scrutiny was unsettling. Still, Their love seemed strong enough to withstand the outside world's judgment. When they called her parents to share the news, the silence on the other end spoke volumes. "We're flying down this weekend," Elise said firmly. "I want you to be part of this joy, Dad." What neither Elise nor Felix could have predicted was how quickly their fairy tale would unravel, or how completely their worlds would be upended by forces neither fully understood. As autumn leaves began to fall across New York, the seeds of their destruction were already taking root, waiting for the perfect moment to shatter their newfound happiness. Chapter 3. A Fairy Tale Wedding. The Plaza Hotel transformed into an enchanted garden for Elise and Felix's wedding day. White roses and orchids cascaded from crystal chandeliers, their perfume mingling with the scent of jasmine and gardenia. Ivy and fairy lights twined around marble columns, creating a magical forest within the iconic ballroom. No expense had been spared. Felix had insisted on creating a day worthy of the woman who had captured his heart so completely. In a private suite upstairs, Elise sat before a mirror as a stylist arranged her final curl. Her wedding gown, a masterpiece of delicate lace and pearl beading, caught the light with every breath. The emerald engagement ring glowed on her finger, matching the earrings Felix had given her that morning, delivered with a note that had brought tears to her eyes. "To my North Star, thank you for guiding me home to love. You look like something from a dream," her mother said, voice thick with emotion as she fastened a bracelet around Elise's wrist, her grandmother's worn by 3 generations of brides in their family. "Are you happy, Mama?" Elise asked softly, meeting her mother's eyes in the mirror. Margaret studied her daughter's face, searching for any sign of doubt. Finding none, she smiled. "If you're happy, baby girl, then so am I." She hesitated. "Your father is trying. He just wants to protect you." Elise nodded, understanding the complexity of her father's feelings. After their engagement announcement, Robert had retreated into stony silence. Only Elise's ultimatum, accept Felix or lose her, had brought him to New York for the wedding. Even now, he waited downstairs with rigid shoulders and a tight smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Has he said anything about Felix?" Elise asked, nervousness creeping into her voice. Margaret sighed. "He spent an hour with Felix this morning. Your father didn't share details, but he did say that the man clearly loves you. That's as close to a blessing as he could manage." The revelation surprised Elise. She hadn't known the 2 men had spoken privately. Whatever had passed between them, her father's presence here today represented significant effort to overcome his misgivings. A knock at the door interrupted their moment. "It's time," called the wedding planner. Elise rose, a vision in white, against the backdrop of Manhattan's skyline visible through the suite's windows. She took a deep breath, centering herself in the certainty of her choice. Whatever doubts others harbored, she knew Felix's heart matched her own. The ceremony unfolded like a dream sequence. 400 guests watched as Elise glided down an aisle strewn with rose petals, her father's arm tense beneath her hand. But when she caught sight of Felix waiting at the altar, his eyes filling with tears at the vision of her, approaching, everything else faded away. She noticed his hands trembling slightly as she reached him. This powerful man rendered vulnerable by love. "You're breathtaking," he whispered when she reached him, his voice catching. Their vows, written by each of them in private, echoed with promises of unwavering devotion. Felix's voice carried through the hushed ballroom as he pledged himself to her. "Elise, before you, I was a man who had everything and nothing simultaneously. You brought color to a grayscale existence, meaning to mere success. I promise to cherish your brilliant mind, your compassionate heart, and your beautiful soul every day, for the rest of our lives. To listen when you speak, to support your dreams as fervently as my own, to love you through whatever storms may come. You are my home, my heart, my future, my everything." Tears streamed freely down Elise's cheeks as she responded. "Felix, you found me when I wasn't looking, loved me when I wasn't expecting it, and showed me that fairy tales sometimes begin after the books close. I promise to stand beside you in joy and sorrow, to remind you of your worth beyond any achievement, to be your safe harbor and your greatest adventure. I give you my trust, my loyalty, my laughter, and a love that will only grow stronger with each passing day. You are the answer to a question my heart didn't know how to ask." As they were pronounced husband and wife, Felix gathered her in his arms with a tenderness that belied his powerful frame. Their kiss sealed promises many in attendance doubted would last the year, a May-December romance between worlds too different to truly merge. The reception that followed was a spectacular fusion of elegance and emotion. New York's elite mingled with Elise's family and college friends, creating unlikely conversations across social divides. Champagne flowed from fountains. A 12-piece orchestra played beneath crystalline light, and a 5-tier cake adorned with sugar flowers waited to be cut. But the true magic came during the couple's first dance. As Ed Sheeran's Perfect filled the ballroom, Felix held Elise as if she were made of precious glass. "Are you happy, Mrs. Carver?" he murmured against her ear. Blissfully, she answered, her heart overflowing. "Though I'm still getting used to the name Elise Carver," he said, testing it on his tongue. "It sounds like poetry." From the edge of the dance floor, Robert watched his daughter with a mixture of love and lingering concern. Beside him, Margaret squeezed his hand. "She's radiant," she whispered. "She is," he conceded. "I just pray it lasts." Across the room, Serena observed the couple with calculating eyes, her champagne glass clutched too tightly between manicured fingers. She'd come dressed to kill in a gown that pushed the boundaries of wedding guest propriety, determined to remind Felix of what he was potentially missing. But his eyes hadn't strayed from Elise once, not even when Serena had deliberately positioned herself in his line of sight during cocktail hour. "Quite the spectacle," commented Winston Hayes, another member of Felix's social circle, as he sidled up beside her. "Give it 6 months. He'll tire of playing professor to the college girl." Serena's red lips curved into a predatory smile. "Perhaps less," she murmured. "Felix has always had a short attention span for his projects." As evening progressed with toasts that ranged from heartfelt to awkwardly revealing, Felix's best man, his chief financial officer and oldest friend, reminisced about Felix's transformation since meeting Elise. For the first time in 20 years, he canceled a board meeting to take her to the botanical gardens, because the cherry blossoms reminded him of her smile. "That's when I knew this woman had performed the impossible. She'd made Felix Carver prioritize love over business." Elise's college roommate spoke next, her affection evident through happy tears. "Elise has always seen the best in people. It's her superpower. In Felix, she found someone who sees the best in her. As her friend, I couldn't ask for anything more beautiful than that." When Robert reluctantly took the microphone, the room tensed. He cleared his throat, looking first at his daughter, radiant with happiness, then at his new son-in-law. "When Elise told us about Felix, I had my doubts," he began bluntly. "I thought no man, especially not one from such a different world, could possibly be worthy of my little girl." He paused, emotion making his voice rough. "I'm still not convinced any man could be worthy of her. But seeing how Felix looks at my daughter, that's a look I recognize. It's how I've looked at her mother for 30 years. So he raised his glass to Felix and Elise. "May your love prove this old man's fears unfounded." His words, an acknowledgement of his concerns while extending tentative blessing, brought fresh tears to Elise's eyes as she mouthed, "Thank you, Daddy," across the room. The night culminated with Felix whisking Elise away in a vintage Rolls-Royce, decorated with white roses, bound for a private jet that would carry them to 2 weeks in the Maldives, a honeymoon paradise of overwater bungalows and turquoise lagoon. "I can't believe this is real," Elise Tracker, as they cuddled in the plush back seat, her head resting on his shoulder. "That you're real, that we're married." Felix lifted her chin, his eyes serious in the dim light. "This is just the beginning, my love. I promise to make every day of our life together feel like this, cherished, celebrated, extraordinary." He kissed her with such tenderness, it brought fresh tears to her eyes. "You've made me the happiest man alive, Elise Carver." Their honeymoon passed in a haze of passion and laughter, swimming with manta rays at dawn, dinners under stars with their feet in warm sand, and nights of lovemaking as waves lapped against the stilts of their bungalow created memories that seemed to cement their bond. In quiet moments, they shared deeper pieces of themselves. Felix confessed childhood insecurities that had driven his relentless ambition. Elise revealed dreams of writing children's books that would help young readers understand complex emotions. "I want to support that dream," Felix said one evening as they watched the sunset paint the horizon in fiery gold. "You have a gift for understanding people, for making difficult things accessible." His encouragement touched her deeply. "I worried my own goals might seem insignificant next to your accomplishments." "Never," he said firmly, taking her hands in his. "Your success will never threaten mine, and mine should never overshadow yours. We rise together, Elise." The conversation revealed the depth of understanding they'd cultivated, a partnership built on mutual respect beyond the physical attraction and emotional connection that had first drawn them together. Upon returning to New York, they moved into Felix's penthouse, now theirs together. Elise added touches that transformed the stylish but impersonal space into a home, photographs in mismatched frames, books stacked on coffee tables, fresh flowers in every room. She arranged her study schedule around Felix's meetings, determined to complete her degree while embracing her new role. For 8 blissful weeks, their marriage seemed to defy all skepticism. They hosted dinners for friends from both their worlds, established Sunday morning traditions of breakfast in bed, followed by long walks in Central Park, and began discussing future plans, perhaps a country home upstate. Eventually children. When Elise completed her degree, her parents visited during Thanksgiving, a tense but ultimately healing occasion, as Robert gradually warmed to Felix, particularly during late-night conversations where the two men discovered unexpected common ground regarding environmental conservation efforts in South Carolina. "He's not what I expected," her father admitted privately to Elise before departing. "There's substance beneath the wealth. I can see why you love him." The acknowledgement meant everything to Elise, who had longed for her father's approval. As November turned to December, life seemed perfect, a fairy tale made real through love and commitment. Then, almost imperceptibly, something began to shift. Chapter 4. Cracks in Paradise. The first hints of trouble were so subtle that Elise almost convinced herself she was imagining them a canceled dinner here, a missed call there, small disappointments, easily explained by Felix's demanding schedule. But as October's crimson leaves gave way to November's barren branches, the distance between them grew more difficult to dismiss. Felix began arriving home later. His kisses distracted his questions about her day perfunctory. When she spoke about her literature professor's praise for her analysis of Toni Morrison's Beloved, his eyes would drift to his phone, his responses generic. "That's great, sweetheart," he'd say, without asking for details that once would have fascinated him. The change coincided with mounting pressure at Carver Enterprises. A major acquisition had hit unexpected regulatory hurdles, creating daily crises that required Felix's constant attention. At least that's what he claimed when Elise gently asked about his increasing absences. "You knew who I was when you married me," he responded one evening, irritation edging his voice. "This company doesn't run itself." The sharp words, so unlike the considerate man she'd married, stung more than Elise showed. "I understand your work is important," she said quietly. "But our marriage should be too." His expression softened momentarily. "You're right. I'm sorry." He pulled her into an embrace that felt more habitual than heartfelt. "This deal is crucial. Once it closes next month, things will calm down." "I promise." She wanted to believe him, needed to believe him, but the explanation didn't account for other troubling changes. The way he'd begun criticizing her clothing choices, suggesting outfits that were more appropriate for a Carver, the increasing frequency with which he mentioned Serena's name in conversations about upcoming social events. "Serena knows everyone worth knowing in the art world," he'd comment casually. "You should let her introduce you around at the gallery opening next week. It would be good for you to develop your own social connections." The suggestion that she needed his ex-girlfriend's help to navigate social waters felt like a subtle undermining of her confidence. More concerning was how often Serena seemed to appear at events they attended, always impeccably styled, always deliberately seeking Felix's attention for urgent business matters that somehow required private conversation. One evening, Elise prepared Felix's favorite meal, blackened salmon with roasted vegetables and wild rice, a recipe her mother had taught her during their last visit to South Carolina. She set the dining table with candles and flowers, dressed in the emerald silk dress he loved, and waited. 7 o'clock came and went, then 8. At 9 she called his office. "Mr. Carver left hours ago," his assistant informed her, confusion evident in her voice. "Around 5, I believe. He mentioned dinner plans, but I assumed he meant with you." Elise's stomach tightened as she thanked the woman and hung up. Where was he? Why hadn't he called? This wasn't like the Felix. She knew the man who texted when he'd be 5 minutes late, who prioritized their time together above all else. But was that Felix real? Or had the considerate, loving husband been a temporary role now fading as novelty wore off? The insidious thought crept in despite her attempts to maintain faith in their connection. At 11:30, the penthouse elevator finally announced his arrival. Elise met him in the foyer, concern and hurt warring in her expression. The candles had burned low, the food long since refrigerated. "Where were you?" she asked, working to keep accusation from her tone. "I was worried." Felix's eyes didn't quite meet hers. "Emergency meeting with investors. Didn't Rachel tell you when you called the lie landed between them, heavy and unexpected? She said you left at 5. A flash of irritation crossed his face. She must be confused. It was a last-minute thing. He moved past her toward the bedroom, loosening his tie. I'm exhausted, Elise. Can we talk tomorrow? Elise stood frozen, the scent of unfamiliar perfume lingering in his wake. Not his usual sandalwood cologne, but something floral and expensive. Something that made her heart constrict painfully. The next morning she woke to an empty bed and a text message. Early meeting. Don't wait up tonight. No terms of endearment. No mention of their missed dinner. No apology for the broken evening. Something was terribly wrong. For 2 weeks, Elise tried to bridge the growing chasm between them. She arranged a weekend getaway to the Catskills. Felix canceled at the last minute. She suggested they recreate their first date at the Italian restaurant in the village. He claimed to be too tired after work. She even reached out to his assistant to block an hour on his calendar for lunch with her, only to arrive at his office and be told he'd left for an off-site meeting with no return time specified. The explanation came from an unexpected source. Esther, their housekeeper who had worked for Felix for years, found Elise weeping in the library one afternoon. "Mrs. Carver," she said, hesitantly, maternal concern overriding professional boundaries. "I've seen this before." Seen what Elise asked, hastily wiping tears. Esther sighed heavily. "Mr. Carver, he's a good man at heart, but powerful men like him, they sometimes forget what matters. When someone like Miss Harper starts circling again." The confirmation of her worst fears left Elise breathless. "You think he's seeing Serena?" "I've worked here 15 years, Esther said gently. "I was here when they were together before. The pattern looks familiar, the late nights, the distraction." She patted Elise's hand awkwardly. "But you're different from his other relationships. What you have is real. He'll remember that." The well-intentioned words offered little comfort as they revealed a pattern Elise hadn't known existed. Had she been naive? Just another in a series of women Felix charmed intensely before growing bored. The revelation coincided with a new physical symptom that Elise initially attributed to stress, persistent morning nausea that left her dizzy and weak. After a week of increasing discomfort, she purchased a pregnancy test more to eliminate the possibility than confirm a suspicion. Staring at the positive result in her trembling hands, Elise experienced a complex wave of emotions: joy, terror, hope that perhaps this might rekindle Felix's fading attention. They had discussed children as a someday dream, not an immediate plan. Yet here was life created in love despite the current discord. That evening she prepared to share the news, setting the table with blue and pink roses, a tiny pair of baby booties nestled among them. Once again she waited. Once again Felix was hours late. When he finally arrived, his demeanor was different, tense, almost volatile. He poured himself a generous scotch before even acknowledging her presence. "We need to talk," he said, his voice unnaturally controlled. Elise gestured to the table, setting her prepared surprise, suddenly feeling childish and naive. "I was hoping to talk, too." But Felix didn't even glance at her careful arrangement. He paced the living room, scotch in hand, like a caged predator. "This isn't working, Elise." 4 simple words that shattered her world. "What isn't working?" she asked, her voice small. "This marriage, us." He drained his glass, setting it down with unnecessary force. "He made a mistake." Elise felt the room tilt, her knees weakening as she sank onto the sofa. "A mistake." She repeated the words, hollow in her mouth. "Our love was a mistake. I got caught up in something that wasn't real." His voice hardened, all traces of the tender man she'd married vanishing before her eyes. "You were different, refreshing, a novelty, but the reality is, we come from different worlds. It was foolish to think this could last." The cruel dismissal of everything they'd shared felt calculated to wound, as if he needed to destroy her completely to justify his actions to himself. In that moment, Elise glimpsed something she'd never seen in their months together, the side of Felix, shaped by privilege and power, the man accustomed to discarding whatever no longer served his purposes. "What changed?" she asked, fighting to maintain dignity despite the tears streaming down her cheeks. "3 months ago, you vowed to love me forever." Felix's jaw tightened, a muscle jumping beneath his skin. "People change. Feelings change. Is there someone else?" The question she dreaded asking, the answer she already knew. A muscle twitched in Felix's jaw. "Does it matter?" The confirmation in his non-answer felt like a physical blow. "It matters to me," she managed. "Fine. Yes." He resumed pacing. "Serena and I reconnected at the charity auction last month. We make sense together, Elise. We always did. She understands my world, my obligations, my lifestyle, and I don't." After everything we've shared, the injustice of it sparked anger through her heartbreak. "I've done everything to understand your world, Felix, while you've made minimal effort to understand mine." He waved dismissively. "That's exactly the problem. You shouldn't have to try so hard. It should be natural." The subtext was unmistakable. Their differences, cultural, racial, socio-economic, had ultimately proven too significant for Felix to overcome. The progressive values he espoused during courtship had crumbled under pressure from his social circle, revealing deep-seated prejudices he'd perhaps never fully recognized in himself. "I want you out by the end of the week." Felix's voice was businesslike now, as if discussing a minor schedule change rather than demolishing her life. "I'll have my lawyers draw up divorce papers. You'll be well provided for, of course." Elise's hand instinctively moved to her still flat stomach. "And what about our baby?" The words hung in the air like smoke. For the first time that evening, Felix appeared genuinely surprised, his composure cracking. "What did you say? I'm pregnant, Felix." She gestured to the forgotten table setting with its tiny booties. "That's what I wanted to tell you tonight." His expression shifted from shock to something darker, more calculating. "Is it mine?" The question, so absurd, so deeply insulting, ignited a fire within Elise that burned through her devastation. She rose slowly to her feet. "How dare you?" she said, her voice low but steady. "You know I've never been with anyone but you." Something ugly flashed across Felix's handsome features. "Do I? You trapped me once with marriage. A baby would be the perfect encore, wouldn't it?" "Trapped you," Elise repeated incredulously. "You pursued me. You proposed to me. You vowed before God and everyone we loved to cherish me forever." "Things change," he said dismissively. "People realize their mistakes." In that moment, looking into the cold eyes of the stranger wearing her husband's face, Elise understood that the man she'd married had either never truly existed or had been consumed by something she couldn't comprehend. Either way, he was gone. "I'll leave tomorrow," she said quietly, dignity replacing her earlier desperation. "But not because you're throwing me away, because I deserve better than a man who discards his promises like yesterday's newspaper." Felix's laugh was bitter, always so poetic. "This is real life, Elise, not one of your literature assignments, and in real life people like us don't end up together." "People like us," she echoed. He waved a dismissive hand toward her. "Look at you, a scholarship student from South Carolina with nothing to offer but pretty words. And look at me. Did you really think this would last?" The facade had completely fallen away, revealing not just the betrayal of infidelity, but a deeper, more insidious prejudice. In vino veritas, or in this case in scotch and anger, the truth emerged. His next words confirmed her worst fears. "Let's be honest, Elise. Your skin color was exotic, entertaining for a while. But I have a reputation to maintain, investors to please. Serena fits the image. You were an experiment." The nakedness of his racism stunned her into momentary silence. This wasn't just about another woman. It was about who Elise fundamentally was, something she could never change, something he'd once claimed to cherish. "Get out," she whispered, tears on her cheeks. "Get out of this apartment right now. I'll be gone by morning, but I cannot spend another minute with the monster you've become." For a moment, something like regret flickered across his face, so briefly she might have imagined it. Then his expression hardened again. "Fine, I'll sleep at the plaza. My lawyers will contact you about the child if it's even mine." With those parting words, he turned and left the elevator doors, closing like a period on the final sentence of their relationship. Alone in the penthouse that had briefly been her home, Elise wrapped her arms around her middle, protective of the tiny life growing within. "It's just you and me now, little one," she whispered. "But I promise we'll be okay." What she couldn't have known then was just how cruel Felix's betrayal would become, or the depths to which he would sink to erase her from his life. Nor could she have imagined how completely circumstances would eventually force him to confront the ugliness of his actions and the authenticity of the love he'd so carelessly discarded. Chapter 5. The Cruel Abandonment. Dawn broke over Manhattan, casting golden light across the penthouse. Elise would never again call home. She had packed only what truly belonged to her, clothes she'd brought from her old apartment books from before their marriage. The few pieces of jewelry that had been gifts from her parents. Everything else, the designer dresses Felix had insisted on buying, the diamond bracelet for their 1-month anniversary. Even her wedding ring, she left on the marble vanity with a simple note. "I never wanted these things. I only wanted your love." Her hands trembled as she zipped her suitcase, exhaustion from a sleepless night of tears, making even simple tasks difficult. The baby, their baby, was just a cluster of cells at 8 weeks. But already Elise felt fiercely protective, whispering promises as she placed a hand over her abdomen. "We don't need him," she murmured. We'll be just fine on our own. But where would they go? Prior from calling her parents, how could she admit that they had been right all along, that the fairy tale had been a cruel illusion? Her friends from college had scattered after graduation, most beginning careers in other cities. The few who remained in New York had tiny apartments already shared with multiple roommates, and her savings, the meager amount she'd set aside from her part-time campus job, wouldn't last 2 weeks in Manhattan. As she waited for the elevator, Elise's phone chimed with a text message. Felix's name appeared on the screen, sending her heart into painful spasms. Despite everything, my lawyers will contact you regarding divorce proceedings. The locks will be changed by noon. Leave your key with the doorman. Don't attempt to contact me directly again. No mention of their child, no acknowledgement of the life they'd shared, or the promises broken, just cold, practical instructions, as if she were an inconvenient business matter to be handled by underlings. The doorman, who had always greeted her with a warm smile, couldn't meet her eyes as she handed over her key card. Had Felix already poisoned even this small relationship, or was the man simply embarrassed on her behalf, another rich man's discarded young wife? Can I call you a taxi? Mrs. Carver, he asked softly. It's Miss Thompson now, she corrected, squaring her shoulders despite the crushing weight on her heart. And no thank you. I'll walk. Walk where? The question echoed with each step as she dragged her suitcase along Madison Avenue. Morning commuters, streaming past in a blur of tailored suits and purposeful strides. Eventually, she found herself in a small cafe in the village, ordering tea she couldn't afford simply to have somewhere to sit while she gathered her thoughts. By afternoon, reality had fully set in. She needed immediate income and a place to stay. Her Columbia scholarship covered tuition but not living expenses. With a baby coming, continuing her education while working full-time seemed an impossible mountain to climb. Yet giving up her degree, the dream that had carried her from South Carolina to New York, felt like surrendering the last piece of herself. Over the next 3 days, Elise stayed in a hostel, applying for every job she could find. Her qualifications, 3 years of an English degree and experience as a campus tour guide, failed to impress in a city teeming with overqualified graduates. By the 4th day, panic had begun to set in. The hostel required payment for another week she couldn't afford. Morning sickness made interviews difficult, and still no job offers materialized. On the 7th day after leaving the penthouse as rain poured from an iron-gray sky, Elise stood outside a Starbucks in Midtown staring at the barista's wanted sign in the window. Not her dream job, not even close to the career in publishing she'd planned, but it offered immediate employment potential, healthcare benefits, and most importantly, a paycheck. I can make coffee, she told herself, one hand resting protectively over her slightly rounded middle. For you, I can do anything. The manager, a kind-eyed woman named Nora, hired her on the spot. Sensing perhaps the desperation beneath Elise's carefully composed exterior, "We can start you tomorrow," she said. Morning shift, 5:00 a.m. to 1:00 p.m. That evening, with her first glimmer of hope in days, Elise found a tiny studio apartment in Washington Heights, far from the luxury she'd briefly known, but clean and safe with a kitchenette and shared bathroom down the hall. The landlord required first and last month's rent she didn't have. "Please," she'd begged, "I start a new job tomorrow. I can pay you half now and half from my first paycheck." Something in her eyes, the determination mingled with fear, must have moved him. "First month only," he conceded gruffly. "But if you're late with the second payment, you're out. No exceptions." The apartment was barely large enough for a twin mattress and small dresser. The walls bore water stains, and the single window overlooked an air shaft. But as Elise spread her only set of sheets over the second-hand mattress, she felt a strange sense of ownership that the penthouse had never provided. This space, however humble, was hers alone. Meanwhile, across town, Felix sat in his newly redecorated penthouse, all traces of Elise meticulously erased, reviewing the divorce papers his attorneys had prepared. Beside him lounged Serena, her blood-red nails tracing patterns on his arm as she peered at the documents. "You're being more than generous," she commented, noting the settlement figure. "After what she did trying to trap you with a pregnancy." Felix's jaw tightened. "We don't know, it's mine." "Of course it isn't," Serena soothed, though doubt flickered briefly in her eyes. She had known Felix for years, had watched his calculated pursuit of Elise with thinly veiled jealousy. The pregnancy timing aligned perfectly with their marriage, but acknowledging that truth wouldn't serve her purposes, "She'll take the money and disappear. Then we can finally move forward with our plans. What neither mentioned was the ugly scene that had unfolded the morning after Elise's departure. Serena had arrived at the penthouse bearing champagne to celebrate their freedom, only to find Felix standing in the bedroom, holding Elise's abandonment note, with an expression of such raw anguish it had momentarily frightened her. She left everything he'd whispered, gesturing to the jewelry arranged neatly on the vanity, every gift, every token. For a fleeting moment, doubt had crossed his features, a recognition of what he'd thrown away. Serena had quickly moved to fill the dangerous space for reflection, taking the note from his hands and tearing it to pieces. "She's manipulating you," she'd insisted. "This is what girls like her do. They play on your guilt. The fact she left these things just proves she was after your money all along. If she really cared about the gifts because they came from you, she'd have kept them." Her words, precisely calculated to twist the knife of Felix's insecurities, had done their work. By evening, his momentary regret had hardened into bitter resolve. His memories of Elise's love reframed as calculated deception. Weeks passed. Autumn gave way to winter. Manhattan transformed with twinkling lights and holiday decorations. Elise settled into a routine, rising at 4:00 a.m. for her Starbucks shift, taking online classes during the afternoon to continue her education, falling into exhausted sleep by 9:00 p.m. Her baby bump grew steadily visible now beneath her oversized sweaters. Regular prenatal vitamins and careful budgeting for nutritious food consumed most of her paycheck, leaving little for extras like heat. On the coldest December nights, she slept in layers of clothing, reciting poetry to her unborn child to distract from the chill. She had received the divorce papers delivered a tax by courier to Starbucks after Felix's investigators discovered her employment. The settlement offered was substantial enough to provide comfortably for years, but came with crushing stipulations. Full termination of parental rights for Felix, a complete non-disclosure agreement forbidding her from ever speaking about their relationship, and mandatory DNA testing of the child upon birth. The implicit message was clear: Felix was willing to pay handsomely to erase both Elise and his potential child from his life permanently. The cruelty of it, the cold dismissal of a life he had helped create, had left her sobbing in the employee bathroom during her break. "I won't take his money," she had decided that night, tearing the papers to shreds. Instead, she returned the shredded documents with a single sentence written on a note card. "We want your love, not your guilt money." The response came via a tersely worded letter from his attorneys. If she refused the settlement, they would pursue aggressive measures to prove the child wasn't Felix's, potentially including invasive prenatal testing and public depositions about her personal life. The threat was clear: accept his terms or be destroyed. Elise had no resources for a legal battle, no means to fight the army of attorneys at Felix's disposal. With trembling hands, she had signed the revised papers, accepting financial support for the child, but refusing the personal settlement. Her only demand that Felix himself sign a statement acknowledging paternity once DNA confirmed it, even if he wanted no relationship with his child. "Your client can erase me from his life," she'd written in her response, "but he cannot erase his own blood. This child deserves to know their father acknowledged them, even if he chose absence." Christmas approached, bringing with it a bone-deep loneliness Elise had never known. Her parents had called repeatedly, increasingly concerned by her vague explanations about her marriage. Unable to bear their questions or disappointment, she had gradually stopped answering, sending only occasional texts, assuring them she was fine. The baby, active now with kicks that sometimes woke her at night, was her only companion, the only heart that beat in rhythm with her own. Little did she know that the new year would bring an encounter that would shatter what fragile peace she had managed to build, and set in motion events that would transform both her life and Felix's forever. Chapter 6. A Fateful Encounter. The January wind cut through Manhattan like a knife, turning the city into a landscape of huddled figures rushing between warm havens. 6 months had passed since Elise's world had shattered. Her belly now curved prominently beneath her Starbucks apron, drawing occasional sympathetic glances from regular customers who had watched her pregnancy progress through autumn and into winter. "You should be sitting down more, Nora," her manager chided gently, as Elise balanced a tray of freshly baked pastries. "You're in your 3rd trimester now." "I'm fine," Elise insisted, though. The persistent ache in her lower back suggested otherwise. Her doctor had warned about working while standing for 8-hour shifts, but taking leave meant losing income she desperately needed before the baby arrived in March. The Midtown Starbucks where she worked was upscale, strategically located near several corporate headquarters and high-end shopping destinations. Executives in tailored coats and designer boots streamed through each morning, most too absorbed in their phones to notice the pregnant barista carefully crafting their complicated orders. Elise preferred it that way. Anonymity had become her shield, her protection against the whispers that had followed her during those final painful weeks as Felix's wife. That evening, as darkness fell early and snow began dusting the sidewalks, Elise was wiping down the counter when the bell above the door chimed. She glanced up automatically, the customary welcome freezing on her lips as her heart stopped beating. Felix stood in the doorway, more handsome than her memories had preserved. His camel hair coat, dusted with snowflakes, his blue eyes scanning the menu board above her head. He wasn't alone. Serena clung to his arm, resplendent in a white fur coat and red leather gloves, her blonde hair swept into an elegant updo. Time seemed to slow as Elise's world narrowed to this impossible moment. She hadn't seen him since that night. 6 months ago, had actively avoided any place he might frequent, too, had stopped reading news or magazines that might carry his image. Yet here he was casually entering her sanctuary, unaware that the woman whose heart he had shattered stood mere feet away. "Hide in the back," Nora whispered urgently, recognizing the frozen terror on Elise's face. "I'll cover the counter." But before Elise could move, Serena's gaze drifted lazily across the shop and locked with hers. Recognition flashed instantly, followed by something cruel and satisfied. She tugged Felix's sleeve, whispering in his ear, while maintaining eye contact with Elise. Felix's head snapped up, his expression cycling rapidly through shocked disbelief. And then something unreadable. As his eyes dropped to her prominent belly, "Well, this is unexpected," Serena drawled loudly enough for nearby customers to hear, slumming it behind a coffee counter. "Elise, how appropriate." The cafe quieted conversations, halting as patrons sensed the tension crackling between the three figures. Elise's cheeks burned with humiliation, but she forced her spine straight, one protective hand resting on her belly. "Welcome to Starbucks," she said. Evenly professionalism. Her only defense. "What can I get for you?" Felix seemed unable to speak, his eyes fixed on her pregnant form. 6 months along now, there could be no doubt that the child she carried had been conceived during their marriage. The timing was irrefutable. Serena's red lips curved into a malicious smile. "Isn't this sweet?" Playing at being self-sufficient, she turned to Felix. "Darling, isn't it admirable how your charity case has found her natural level? That's enough." Felix's voice was tight, something like discomfort flickering across his features. He reached for his wallet. "We're leaving." "Oh, but I'm suddenly craving coffee." Serena insisted, stepping closer to the counter. Her cold eyes assessed Elise like a predator, evaluating wounded prey. "You know, Felix was just saying he can't imagine how anyone manages on minimum wage. Yet here you are proving that anyone can play at independence until reality sets in." Elise's hands trembled slightly as she reached for a cup, determined not to give Serena the satisfaction of seeing her crumble. "Your order, please." "A venti chai latte," Serena replied sweetly, "and perhaps some advice on adoption agencies. Surely you're not planning to raise a child in whatever squalid conditions you're living in now." The cup slipped from Elise's fingers, clattering to the counter. "My child is not your concern," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the thundering of her heart. "Serena enough." Felix's voice held a warning now, his eyes not leaving Elise's bump, something complicated and pained crossing his expression. "We're leaving now." But Serena wasn't finished. She leaned closer, her perfectly manicured finger tapping the counter between them. "You should have taken the money when it was offered, little girl." Playing the martyr might feel noble, but what kind of mother chooses pride over her child's well-being? No wonder Felix realized his mistake so quickly. Each word was a precision strike against Elise's deepest insecurities, fears that had kept her awake through countless nights, as she questioned whether her determination to forge ahead independently was selfish, whether her child might suffer for her refusal to accept Felix's settlement. "My child will have everything that matters," Elise replied, surprising herself with the steel in her voice. "Love, honesty, integrity, things money can't buy, and you clearly can't comprehend." Felix's sharp intake of breath suggested her words had found their mark. He grabbed Serena's elbow roughly. "We're done here." But Serena twisted free her composed mask, slipping to reveal the jealousy beneath. "Does your manager know you're harassing customers, barista?" Perhaps we should speak with your attitude. I'm the manager, Nora interjected, firmly stepping beside Elise. And I think it's time for you to leave. We reserve the right to refuse service to anyone creating a hostile environment. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Serena's perfect features. Being publicly dismissed wasn't part of her calculated humiliation plan. Come on. Felix urged, his eyes darting uncomfortably around the now silent cafe, where several customers were openly watching the drama unfold. This is beneath us. Beneath us, Serena repeated with a hollow laugh. Yes, exactly like your former mistake. She cast one final contemptuous glance at Elise's swollen belly. Though I suppose we should thank her for confirming what we already knew. She trapped you with the oldest trick in the book. Pathetic. Something in Elise, perhaps the hormones surging through her system, perhaps months of suppressed rage, perhaps the fierce protective instinct of impending motherhood, snapped at Serena's cruel words. You know nothing about love, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the hushed cafe. You pursued a man who stood before God and promised himself to another. You helped destroy a marriage and a family without a moment's remorse. And now you stand here flaunting your relationship built on betrayal and have the audacity to call me pathetic. Her eyes shifted to Felix's shocked face. I pity you both. Felix's complexion had drained of color. His jaw clenched so tightly a muscle jumped beneath his skin. For a moment, just a heartbeat. Something like recognition flashed in his eyes, as if seeing past months of Serena's manipulations to a truth he'd buried. Let's go, he said hoarsely, physically pulling Serena toward the door. This isn't over, Serena hissed as she was dragged away, her composed facade cracking completely. You'll regret this. I promise you. The bell jangled harshly as they exited into the snowy night, leaving behind a cafe full of wide-eyed customers and one pregnant barista clinging to the counter for support as her knees threatened to buckle. Take a break, Nora ordered gently, leading Elise toward the back room. Right now, once behind the closed door of the employee area, Elise's carefully maintained composure shattered. Tears, she'd held back for months, poured down her cheeks as her body shook with silent sobs. The baby kicked furiously, responding to the surge of stress hormones flooding her system. I'm sorry, little one, she whispered, stroking her belly. I'm so sorry. He's the father, Nora asked quietly, handing Elise a glass of water. Elise nodded, unable to form words through her tears. And he left you while you were pregnant. Incredulity and disgust tinged Nora's voice. He didn't know, Elise managed after a moment. Not when he ended things. I told him that night, but he accused me of trapping him. Suggested the baby wasn't his. Jesus. Nora breathed, sitting heavily beside her. What are you going to do now that he's seen you seen? She gestured to Elise's prominent bump. It was the question Elise had been asking herself since the moment Felix's shocked eyes had registered her pregnancy. The truth was, she didn't know. The fragile independence she'd built these past months suddenly felt terrifyingly vulnerable. What if Serena's parting threat wasn't empty? What if Felix, confronted with undeniable evidence of his child, decided to leverage his wealth and power to take the baby once it was born? I don't know, she admitted, freckles spilling. I just don't know. What neither woman could have anticipated was that across town, in the back of his chauffeured car, Felix sat in rigid silence, deaf to Serena's continued tirade about the encounter. His mind replayed the image of Elise, her face thinner shadows beneath her eyes, her skin stretched over the undeniable evidence of his child standing proudly behind that counter despite everything he'd done to her. For the first time in 6 months, doubt cracked the narrative. Serena had so carefully constructed, and in that small fissure long-buried shame began to take root. Neither Felix nor Elise could have predicted how their worlds would collide again, or how completely their lives would be transformed by the events that fateful encounter would set in motion. Chapter 7. The Collapse. Elise managed to finish her shift mechanical movements, masking the storm raging within. Each motion steaming milk, grinding beans, offering rehearsed smiles to customers, required concentration that momentarily distracted from the hollow ache spreading through her chest. The customers who had witnessed the confrontation cast sympathetic glances her way, a few leaving unusually generous tips with whispered words of encouragement that threatened to shatter her fragile composure. That woman was horrible to you, an elderly regular murmured as Elise handed over his evening cappuccino. Some people have no heart. She merely nodded, unable to trust her voice. If only they knew the full story, that the handsome man in the camel coat was her husband, that the child she carried was his, that she had once believed in a love so perfect it seemed written in the stars. Now those same stars mocked her with their cold, distant light. Throughout the afternoon, Elise had noticed increasing discomfort, a persistent dull ache in her lower back, occasional tightening across her abdomen that she attributed to stress. By closing time, the pain had intensified, accompanied by a heaviness that made each movement an effort. Still, she dismissed these warning signs, focusing instead on simply making it through until she could collapse in the privacy of her tiny apartment. "I'll walk you home," Nora insisted when closing time finally arrived. The snow had intensified, transforming Manhattan into a glittering, treacherous landscape of white-capped buildings and slick sidewalks. The beautiful snowfall that would have once delighted Elise now seemed like another obstacle to overcome. "I'm fine," Elise protested weakly, though the thought of the long subway ride to Washington Heights suddenly seemed insurmountable. Her body felt heavier than usual, a bone-deep exhaustion settling into her limbs that went beyond the normal fatigue of pregnancy and an 8-hour shift. "It's not a request," Nora replied, firmly watching as Elise's trembling hands struggled with her coat buttons. "You've had a shock, and in your condition," the mention of her condition sent fresh pain radiating through Elise. Seeing Felix witnessing his evident disgust at finding her working as a barista, pregnant with the child he denied had reopened wounds she'd thought were beginning to heal. The carefully constructed walls that had protected her heart these past months had crumbled at the mere sight of his face. In the past week, her pregnancy had begun showing more pronounced symptoms: swollen ankles by day's end, occasional dizziness when standing too quickly, and increasing blood pressure at her last prenatal checkup. Her doctor had warned her to reduce stress and monitor for warning signs like headaches or visual disturbances. Today, the confrontation with Felix and Serena had triggered exactly the type of emotional distress she was supposed to avoid. Outside, the bitter January wind stole her breath, crystallizing the tears that still threatened at the corners of her eyes. Snow swirled in hypnotic patterns beneath the streetlights, each flake a tiny, perfect thing, fragile and temporary, like the love she'd once believed would last forever. The city's sounds seemed muffled by the snowfall, creating an eerie silence that matched the emptiness echoing inside her. They had taken only a few steps when Elise felt a strange sensation, a lightheadedness that made the streetlights blur into streaks of golden haze, followed by a cramping pain that doubled her over. The discomfort was different from the Braxton Hicks contractions she'd experienced, occasionally sharper, more insistent, accompanied by a wetness between her thighs that sent primal fear coursing through her veins. Elise Nora's voice seemed to come from very far away, tunneling through cotton wool that seemed to fill Elise's ears. "Oh God, you're bleeding." She tried to respond, to articulate the terror suddenly gripping her heart. But darkness encroached at the edges of her vision, a black tide rising to claim her consciousness. The last thing Elise registered before consciousness slipped away was the cold kiss of snowflakes on her upturned face, the terrifying sensation of falling Haiti, and Nora's panicked voice calling for help. Sirens, harsh fluorescent lights, strange hands touching her belly. These fragments penetrated the fog as Elise drifted in and out of awareness inside the ambulance. Masked faces hovered above her voices, urgent but controlled, as they worked over her body that no longer seemed entirely her own. One thought crystallized with terrifying clarity through the haze of semi-consciousness: "Please let my baby be okay." BP's dropping 8,040 and falling, 6 months pregnant, possible placental abruption, fetal heartbeat, showing distress. Beta, an O-ready page obstetrics, and NICU stat. These urgent medical exchanges filtered through her semi-consciousness as the ambulance raced through Manhattan's snowy streets, sirens wailing a desperate plea for passage through the crowded thoroughfares. Each bump in the road sent fresh waves of pain radiating through her abdomen, and Elise found herself mentally reciting the poetry she had planned to read to her child after birth, fragments of Langston Hughes and Maya Angelou, mixing with desperate prayers. Her doctor had explained the risks of placental abruption during a recent appointment, a rare but serious condition where the placenta separates prematurely from the uterine wall. High blood pressure was a risk factor, and Elise's had been elevated at her last checkup. The stress of today's confrontation may have been the final trigger for a crisis that had been building silently for days. Panic surged through her weakened body as reality penetrated her fog. It was too soon. The baby wasn't ready. 24 weeks was the edge of viability. She had researched obsessively, knew the statistics, understood the tremendous challenges facing extremely premature infants. Images of impossibly tiny babies connected to mazes of tubes and wires flashed through her mind, intensifying her terror. "My baby," she whispered, her voice so faint the paramedic had to lean close to hear. "Please save my baby." "We're doing everything we can," the young woman assured her, squeezing her hand. "Mount Sinai has an excellent NICU. Try to stay calm for your little one." But calmness was impossible as memories crashed through her consciousness. Felix's face, when she'd first told him about the pregnancy, the disgust and accusation in his eyes, his casual cruelty in suggesting the child wasn't his, followed by his expression tonight, shock, giving way to something unreadable as his gaze had fixed on her swollen belly. Had there been regret there beneath the surface, or just embarrassment at being confronted with evidence of his abandoned responsibilities? Another wave of pain tore through her, stronger than before, pulling a cry from her lips that seemed to echo in the confined space of the ambulance. The paramedic's expression tightened with concern as she checked the monitors. "ETA 3 minutes," the driver called back. "Tell them to have blood ready," the paramedic responded tersely. "Oh, negative. Until we can cross-match. She's losing too much." The words floated above Elise like dandelion seeds on a summer breeze, detached from their terrifying meaning. Her mind drifted to her parents. Would they ever know if something happened to her? Would anyone tell them they had a grandchild? The thought of her mother never holding this baby, never singing the lullabies that had soothed Elise's own childhood fears, brought fresh tears streaming down her temples. As the ambulance doors burst open at the emergency entrance, revealing a waiting team of medical personnel silhouetted against the hospital's bright lights, Elise made a silent vow. If they survived this, she and this child, who had become her entire world, she would stop hiding. She would call her parents, swallow her pride, and allow them back into her life. This baby deserved to know the love of grandparents who would cherish them even if their father had chosen absence. 24 weeks pregnant, BP 7,430. Significant vaginal bleeding, suspected placental abruption. The paramedic rattled off as they transferred Elise to a waiting gurney. Fetal heart rate showing late decelerations. A doctor appeared in Elise's narrowing field of vision, her dark eyes calm above her surgical mask. "I'm Dr. Navarro, the obstetrician on call. We're taking you to surgery now, Elise. We need to deliver your baby immediately." Terror clawed at Elise's throat. Too soon, she managed to whisper. "Please wait." "We can't wait, doctor," Navarro said gently but firmly as they rushed down fluorescent-lit corridors. "Your placenta is separating from your uterine wall. Your baby isn't getting enough oxygen. I know it's frightening, but this is the best chance for both of you." As they pushed through double doors marked operating theater, Elise felt consciousness slipping away again, darkness encroaching, despite her desperate fight to stay awake. As an oxygen mask was placed over her face, and an anesthesiologist spoke soothing words, she couldn't quite comprehend. Her last coherent thought was of the tiny life inside her, a life created in love regardless of how that love had ended. "Fight, little one," she silently implored, as the drugs pulled her under. "We've come too far to give up now." Across the city, unaware of the life and death drama unfolding, Felix sat in his study, a glass of untouched scotch before him, haunted by the image of Elise's face. When she'd seen him, the initial shock, the flash of lingering pain, the quiet dignity with which she'd faced Serena's cruelty. Something about that encounter had shaken loose memories. He'd spent months trying to bury Elise's laughter in the early days, her intelligence that had challenged and delighted him, the way she'd looked on their wedding day, radiant with a love he'd once believed was genuine. The advanced state of her pregnancy was undeniable evidence that contradicted the narrative he'd constructed, that she had lied about the baby to trap him, that she had been unfaithful. Seeing her in that Starbucks uniform, clearly struggling, but carrying herself with dignity, had triggered uncomfortable questions he'd been suppressing for months. Had Serena been manipulating him? The thought had never seriously occurred to him before, but now snippets of conversations replayed in his mind, her constant subtle undermining of Elise, her convenient evidence of Elise's supposed social missteps, her insistence that the pregnancy was either fabricated or not his. His phone rang, interrupting his troubling reverie. "Caller unknown. Mr. Carver." A woman's unfamiliar voice, tense with urgency. "This is Nora Martinez from Starbucks. Your wife, ex-wife Elise, has been taken to Mount Sinai Hospital. There were complications with the pregnancy. It's serious. I thought you should know." The words landed like physical blows, each one stealing his breath. "What happened?" he demanded already, reaching for his coat. "She collapsed outside the store after you left. There was blood." "A lot of blood." The paramedics said something about the placenta separating. Nora's voice cracked. "I rode with her in the ambulance. She kept asking them to save the baby, just the baby, not herself." "Which Mount Sinai location?" "The main hospital on Fifth Avenue." As he rushed from the penthouse calling for his driver, Felix realized with devastating clarity that his actions, from the cruel abandonment to tonight's public humiliation, may have directly contributed to this medical emergency. The elevated stress, the emotional trauma, the physical demands of working while pregnant, all consequences of his rejection. What kind of man had he become? The question echoed as his car sped through snow-slicked streets. The sophisticated justifications he'd built to excuse his behavior crumbled beneath the weight of one irrefutable fact: Elise could die tonight. Their child could die tonight, and if they did, their blood would be on his hands. At the hospital, controlled chaos greeted him. He identified himself at the emergency desk and was directed to a surgical waiting area where Nora sat alone, still wearing her Starbucks uniform, now stained with Elise's blood. She looked up as he approached, her expression hardening. "You've got some nerve showing up here. I need to know if they're alive," he said, simply, all pretense stripped away by genuine fear. "They took her into surgery 20 minutes ago. That's all I know." Nora's gaze was unflinching. "Why did you treat her that way tonight? Haven't you hurt her enough?" The question hung in the air, demanding an answer. Felix wasn't sure he could articulate. How could he explain that seeing Elise had triggered a complex storm of emotions: shame, regret, longing, and the defensive anger that had become his shield against acknowledging his own culpability? "I have no excuse," he finally said, sinking into a chair across from her. "None that matters." To his surprise, the simple admission seemed to soften Nora's hostility slightly. "She never badmouths you, you know. Even when customers recognize her last name and ask questions, she just says you're separated." The information landed like another blow. Elise's dignity in the face of his cruelty made his own behavior seem all the more contemptible. Minutes stretched into hours with no updates. Felix paced the waiting room, made calls to ensure Elise would have a private room, contacted the hospital administration to guarantee the best possible care using wealth and influence in the only way that seemed meaningful now. Finally, a surgeon in blood-spattered scrubs emerged through swinging doors, her expression grave but professional. "Family of Elise Thompson?" she asked, scanning the waiting area. "Yes." Felix stepped forward, ignoring Nora's surprised glance. "I'm her husband." The surgeon, Dr. Navarro, according to her badge, assessed him briefly before speaking. "Miss Thompson suffered a severe placental abruption, causing significant hemorrhaging. We performed an emergency cesarean section and have stabilized her condition, though she remains critical." "And the baby?" The question felt stuck in his throat. "Doctor." Navarro's expression softened slightly. "Your daughter was delivered at 24 weeks and 5 days gestation. She weighs 665 grams, approximately 1 pound 7 ounces. She's been transferred to our NICU, where she's receiving specialized care." A daughter. They had a daughter. The abstract concept of the baby suddenly transformed into something tangible, real, a tiny person fighting for life. "Will they survive?" he asked, voice barely audible. "Miss Thompson has a challenging recovery ahead, but barring complications, yes. As for your daughter, Dr. Navarro chose her words carefully. Infants born at this gestational age face significant hurdles. The survival rate is approximately 60 to 70%, and among survivors, many face developmental challenges. The next 72 hours will be critical." As the doctor departed, Felix turned to find Nora watching him with an unreadable expression. "Will you stay with her?" he asked quietly. "Until I get back? I don't want her to be alone." "Where are you going to make calls I should have made months ago?" In the hospital corridor, away from curious eyes, Felix leaned against the wall, overcome by emotions he'd suppressed for too long. Then, straightening his shoulders, he made 2 crucial calls, first to Margaret and Robert Thompson, informing them of their daughter's condition and arranging immediate travel to New York. Second to Serena, ending their relationship in terms that left no room for manipulation or return. The choices were small against the magnitude of his mistakes, but they represented the first steps on a path he should have taken months ago, a path toward accountability, toward redemption, toward becoming the man Elise had once believed him to be. Whether she would ever forgive him remained uncertain, but one truth crystallized with painful clarity: their daughter deserved better than the father he had been. Somehow, if they both survived this night, he would find a way to become worthy of her. With this resolution burning in his heart, Felix returned to the waiting room, prepared for the vigil ahead and whatever consequences awaited when Elise finally opened her eyes. Chapter 8. Between life and death, Mount Sinai Hospital buzzed with controlled urgency as surgeons worked to save both Elise and her child. Dr. Navarro's calm voice directed the emergency cesarean section, while neonatal specialists stood ready for an infant arriving dangerously early. BP stabilizing, announced the anesthesiologist. She's responding to the transfusion. Moments later, Dr. Navarro carefully lifted a tiny infant from Elise's womb. No lusty cry announced this baby's arrival, only a team of neonatologists attending to the silent purplish form. "It's a girl, doctor," Navarro called out, though Elise remained unconscious. The infant, weighing just 1 pound 7 ounces, was whisked to an incubator immediately connected to ventilators and monitors. Her skin, nearly translucent, revealed the delicate tracery of veins beneath. Her eyes remained fused, shut, her grip on life tenuous at best. 24 weeks, 5 days, gestational age. The lead neonatologist dictated severe respiratory distress syndrome, evident starting surfactant therapy, and prophylactic antibiotics. Meanwhile, surgeons continued working on Elise, whose placental abruption had caused significant hemorrhaging. Units of blood pumped into her veins as they fought to stabilize her condition. Outside in the waiting area, Nora paced anxiously, her Starbucks uniform still splattered with Elise's blood. The elevator doors opened, and Felix strode in, his face ashen. "Where is she?" he demanded, voice tight with fear. "In surgery," Nora replied defensively. "They're performing an emergency C-section. The placenta separated from the uterine wall. It's life-threatening for both of them." Felix staggered slightly. "Both your child," Nora said pointedly. "The one you abandoned along with your wife." "I didn't know," he whispered unconvincingly. "When I left, I didn't know she was pregnant." "She told you that night," Nora accused. "You chose not to believe her." Felix sank into a chair, head in his hands. His carefully constructed narrative that Elise had trapped him, that the pregnancy wasn't his responsibility, crumbled beneath the weight of reality. During his vigil, Felix made 2 crucial phone calls, first to Margaret and Robert Thompson in South Carolina, a difficult conversation where he had to explain both Elise's condition and his own inexcusable behavior. Second, to Serena, ending their relationship definitively. Eventually, Dr. Navarro emerged, exhaustion evident in her eyes. "Miss Thompson has survived the surgery, but she lost a significant amount of blood. We've placed her in a medically induced coma." She paused. "Your daughter was delivered at 24 weeks, 5 days gestation. She weighs 665 grams, extremely premature. The next 72 hours will be critical for both of them." "Daughter," Felix repeated. "We have a daughter. She's in the NICU, Dr. Navarro continued. Her lungs are severely underdeveloped. Babies born this prematurely face significant challenges. The survival rate is approximately 60 to 70%, and those who survive often face developmental complications." Dawn was breaking when a nurse led Felix to Elise's room. The sight of her pale against white sheets, tubes, and wires connecting her to machines shattered something within him. This vibrant woman lay fighting for survival because of choices he had made. "She can't hear you," the nurse advised gently, but sometimes familiar voices help even in a coma. Left alone with Elise, Felix approached hesitantly. He gently took her limp hand. "I'm so sorry," he whispered, tears falling freely. "Our daughter is fighting, and so are you. Please don't give up." Later, a NICU nurse allowed him to see his daughter. Through the incubator's clear walls, Felix beheld the tiniest human he'd ever seen. A being so fragile, it seemed impossible she could survive. "She's beautiful," he whispered, placing his hand against the plexiglass. "She's a fighter," the nurse commented. "Does she have a name?" The question caught Felix off guard. "I don't know what Elise had planned," he admitted. Looking at the tiny form fighting with each breath, Felix thought of Elise's favorite poet. "Lila," he said softly. "For now, call her Lila." Around noon, Margaret and Robert Thompson arrived. Robert paused long enough to deliver a single statement. "If they survive this, making amends will be the work of your lifetime, and even that might not be enough." Over the following days, an uneasy alliance formed between Felix and the Thompson family. When not handling logistics, Felix took the overnight shift at the NICU, sitting beside Lila's incubator from midnight until dawn, reading from volumes of Maya Angelou and Langston Hughes that he'd found in Elise's apartment. On the fourth day, as Felix dozed beside Elise's bed, a slight pressure on his hand jolted him awake. Her eyes were open, confusion evident in their depths. "Elise," he breathed. "You're awake." Her cracked lips formed a single word, "baby." "She's alive," he assured her quickly. "She's tiny but fighting hard." Recognition dawned in Elise's eyes, followed by weariness, as she realized who sat beside her. Her hand withdrew from his. "Why are you here?" she managed with difficulty. Before Felix could answer, Dr. Clayson, Navarro interred, as she examined Elise and explained her condition. Elise's eyes repeatedly drifted to Felix with suspicion. When the doctor mentioned that your husband hasn't left the hospital, Elise's expression hardened. "Not husband," she whispered. "Want to see my baby." When they were alone again, Felix recognized the distress his presence caused. "I'll go," he said. "I just needed to know you were both alive." Elise's gaze was direct, despite her weakness. "Why now?" she asked simply. "Why care now?" "Because seeing you in that coffee shop woke me up," he admitted. "Because I've been a fool, manipulated by someone who never wanted us to succeed, and by my own insecurities. Because I never stopped loving you even when I convinced myself I had." Tears slipped down Elise's cheeks. "Too late," she whispered. "Too much pain." Felix nodded, accepting this truth. "I know. I don't expect forgiveness. I just want to help now for you and for our daughter." Lila, Elise said unexpectedly. "What I was going to name her Lila," she explained softly after Angelou. He finished. "Astonished, I told the NICU nurses to call her Lila until you woke up." Something flickered in Elise's expression, not forgiveness, but perhaps recognition of the connection that had once bound them. "She needs us both now," Felix continued gently. "Beyond that, I expect nothing. I've forfeited any right to your heart, but please don't shut me out of our daughter's life." Exhaustion was claiming Elise again, her eyelids growing heavy. "We'll see," she murmured as sleep began to reclaim her. "Lila deserves better than what we've been." Later that day, when Elise first visited Lila, Felix deliberately absented himself. From the hallway, he glimpsed Elise's face as she beheld her daughter's shock, giving way to fierce protective love. That evening, Robert Thompson found Felix in the hospital chapel. "Margaret thinks you've changed," he said, without preamble. "She says you're not the same man who abandoned our daughter." "I hope I'm not," Felix replied. "But change takes more than a few days of crisis and regret." As they spoke, a nurse appeared with urgent news. They arrived at the NICU to find medical staff crowded around Lila's incubator, working frantically as Elise watched in terror from her wheelchair. "Suspected sepsis," a nurse explained. "Her condition deteriorated rapidly." Near midnight, Dr. Chen emerged. "She's responding to the antibiotics," he reported cautiously. "The next 12 hours will tell us more." As Elise was wheeled back to her room, her eyes briefly met Felix's. No words passed between them, but something fundamental had shifted, a shared foxhole experience that transcended their painful history. They were co-parents now united in terror and hope for the fragile life they had created together. Chapter 9. The Reckoning. February arrived with bitter winds and frosted windows, but inside Mount Sinai Hospital, Elise's world had narrowed to 2 rooms, the NICU, where tiny Lila fought for each breath, and her own recovery room, where she battled the physical and emotional aftermath of near tragedy. Her strength returned gradually, first allowing short walks to the bathroom, then longer journeys down the corridor, supported by nurses who had grown protective of the young mother, who had nearly died bringing her daughter into the world. By the second week, she could manage the journey to the NICU unassisted, where she spent hours beside Lila's incubator reading poetry in a soft voice and gently touching her daughter through the designated opening. "Her oxygen saturation improves when you're here," remarked Dr. Chen, the lead neonatologist, during his rounds one morning. "She knows her mother's voice." Elise's heart swelled with both love and fear. At just over 2 pounds now, Lila remained desperately fragile each day, bringing new challenges from suspected infections to breathing difficulties. But along with the challenges came small victories. A removed wire here, an improved test result there, moments when Lila would wrap her tiny fingers around Elise's pinky with surprising strength. Felix remained a constant, unsettling presence throughout these days. True to his word, he hadn't left the hospital except for brief trips home to shower and change clothes. He maintained a respectful distance from Elise, never entering her room without permission, never appearing at the NICU during her regular visiting hours unless explicitly invited. Instead, he took the overnight shift, sitting beside Lila's incubator from midnight until dawn reading the same poetry books Elise had left behind, ensuring their daughter never spent a moment without parental presence. The nursing staff watched this careful dance between the estranged couple with quiet interest. Rumors circulated, snippets gathered from overheard conversations, and Nora's protective visits, the millionaire husband who had abandoned his pregnant wife, now keeping vigil, as if atonement could be measured in sleepless nights. Untouched hospital, cafeteria meals. 3 weeks after Lila's birth, as Elise sat beside the incubator during her morning visit, the NICU doors opened to admit an unfamiliar woman in judicial robes, escorted by a nervous-looking nurse. "Miss Thompson," the woman inquired, approaching with professional warmth. "I'm Judge Vivian Marshall. I hope you'll forgive this unorthodox visit, but I understand you've been unable to leave your daughter's side." Confusion crossed Elise's features. "Judge, I don't understand. May I?" Judge Marshall gestured to the chair beside Elise, waiting for permission before settling her substantial frame into it. Up close, Elise could see the intelligence in the older woman's dark eyes, the silver threading through her tightly coiled hair, and the compassion in her expression as she gazed at Lila. "She's beautiful," the judge observed a fighter clearly. "Thank you," Elise replied automatically, still perplexed by this unexpected visit. "But I still don't. I've been assigned to your divorce case." Judge Marshall explained gently. "The preliminary hearing was scheduled for yesterday, but given your circumstances, your husband's attorney requested an unusual accommodation." She smiled slightly. "After 30 years on the bench, I've learned that sometimes justice is better served by bending procedural norms." The divorce in the chaos of Lila's premature birth and her own medical crisis, Elise had forgotten entirely about the legal proceedings that had been initiated months ago. "I don't have an attorney," she admitted, embarrassment coloring her cheeks. "I couldn't afford one, and with the baby coming," Judge Marshall's expression softened further. "That's partially why I'm here. Your husband has withdrawn all previous motions and is requesting a complete revision of terms." She produced a folder from her briefcase. "I wanted to ensure you understood what was being proposed before the court proceeds." Elise accepted the folder with trembling hands, opening it to find legal documents. Her exhausted mind struggled to comprehend. In simple terms, Judge Marshall continued, recognizing Elise's overwhelm. "Mr. Carver is retracting his previous demands regarding parental rights and confidentiality. He's offering substantial financial support for both you and your daughter, without any restrictions on your interaction with his family or business associates. Most significantly, he's requesting that the divorce proceedings be paused for 6 months to allow for potential reconciliation counseling, should you be amenable." The words landed like stones in still water, creating ripples of confusion and disbelief. "Reconciliation. That's his request." "Yes." Judge Marshall watched her carefully. "However, I should note that the financial provisions are not contingent on this. They would be implemented immediately, regardless of your decision about the marriage." "Why would he?" Elise began, then stopped, uncertain how to articulate the complexity of her feelings. "I don't typically involve myself personally in divorce cases," Judge Marshall admitted, "but certain aspects of this situation resonated with me: the significant power imbalance, the racial dynamics, and now a child born under such dramatic circumstances." She leaned forward slightly. "Miss Thompson, I want to be very clear. The court will protect your interests and your daughter's, regardless of your husband's wealth or influence. If you wish to proceed with the divorce, we will ensure equitable terms." Tears gathered in Elise's eyes, overwhelmed by this unexpected advocacy. "Thank you," she whispered. Judge Marshall reached out briefly, touching Elise's hand, a gesture that crossed professional boundaries but offered human connection that Elise desperately needed. "Take time to review these documents. A court-appointed attorney will contact you to explain everything in detail and represent your interests." After the judge departed, Elise sat motionless, the folder heavy in her lap. Through the incubator's clear walls, Lila's tiny chest rose and fell with each precious breath, utterly unaware of the complex adult world surrounding her precarious beginning. It was in this contemplative state that Felix found her during the brief period when their visiting times overlapped the changing of the guard they typically orchestrated to avoid prolonged interaction. "Elise," he questioned softly, noting her distress, "is everything all right? Has Lila's condition changed?" Wordlessly, she held up the folder, watching, as recognition dawned in his eyes. "Judge Marshall came to see me," she said, her voice steadier than she expected. "Why, Felix, why now?" After everything, he sank into the chair the judge had vacated, looking utterly exhausted. The polished businessman was long gone, replaced by a man whose designer clothes hung loosely on his frame, whose face carried the shadows of prolonged worry. "Because these past weeks have stripped away every lie I told myself," he answered simply. "Because watching you with Lila, seeing your strength and grace despite everything I put you through, has shown me exactly what I threw away." "You didn't just throw it away," Elise countered, old pain surfacing. "You deliberately destroyed it. You called our love a mistake. You accused me of trapping you with a pregnancy you believed was fake or someone else's. You let Serena humiliate me publicly." Felix flinched at each accusation, but didn't attempt to defend himself. "Yes," he acknowledged, "I did those unforgivable things. Then why expect reconciliation is even possible?" His eyes met hers directly, more honest than she'd seen since those early days of their courtship. "I don't expect it, Elise. I'm just hoping for the chance to earn back some small measure of trust, not as your husband necessarily, but as Lila's father, as someone who will spend a lifetime attempting to atone for inexcusable cruelty." Before Elise could respond, alarms suddenly blared from Lila's monitors. Within seconds, medical staff swarmed the incubator, their urgent voices calling for medication and equipment, as Lila's tiny body seized her oxygen levels, plummeting dangerously. "What's happening?" Elise cried, rising in panic, only to be gently but firmly moved aside by a nurse. "Possible sepsis," Dr. Chen explained tersely as he worked. "We need to intubate her again and start broad-spectrum antibiotics immediately." The next hours passed in a terrifying blur. Lila was rushed to a procedure room, leaving Elise and Felix standing side by side in helpless fear. Without conscious thought, Elise found her hand gripping Felix's, drawing strength from the one person who shared this particular terror completely. "She can't die," Elise whispered, voice breaking. "After everything, she can't. She won't," Felix stated with a conviction that surprised them both. "She's part of you, Elise. That means she's the strongest person in this hospital." The unexpected praise, so reminiscent of the man who had once cherished her, broke something open inside Elise. Sobs she'd held back for months poured forth, and without hesitation, Felix enfolded her in his arms, offering silent support as they faced this crisis together. Hours later, Dr. Chen emerged, exhaustion evident in his features, but relief visible as well. "We've stabilized her. The infection is responding to antibiotics, and her vital signs are improving." The next 24 hours remained critical. Relief made Elise's knees buckle. This time she didn't resist when Felix supported her, helping her to a chair and bringing water that she accepted gratefully. "You should rest," he advised gently. "I'll stay with her. I promise to call if anything changes." Too drained to argue, Elise nodded, allowing a nurse to escort her back to her room. Sleep claimed her immediately, her body demanding recovery from the emotional ordeal. She woke to find someone had placed a vase of fresh wildflowers beside her bed. Not expensive hothouse roses or exotic blooms, but humble daisies and black-eyed Susans that grew wild in South Carolina. A familiar handwriting adorned the accompanying card. "These always reminded me of you, beautiful without pretension, strong despite delicacy. Lila is stable this morning. Take all the time you need to rest." Something shifted in Elise's heart. Not forgiveness exactly, but perhaps the first crack in the wall of pain she'd built between them. The flowers spoke of the Felix. She had fallen in love with the man who had noticed her favorite blooms during their visit to her parents' home, and remembered even now. Later that morning, as Elise prepared to return to the NICU, her room phone rang. The unfamiliar voice identified herself as Ellen Carter, the court-appointed attorney Judge Marshall had mentioned. "Miss Thompson, I've reviewed your case thoroughly," the lawyer explained. "I want to discuss some concerning aspects of your husband's behavior that may constitute emotional abuse and potential racial discrimination. These elements significantly strengthen your position should you wish to proceed with divorce." Racial discrimination, Elise echoed, caught off guard by the attorney's directness. "Your husband's comments during your separation, particularly his reference to your skin color as exotic, but ultimately unsuitable for his public image, constitute discriminatory behavior that Judge Marshall takes extremely seriously," Ellen explained. "Combined with abandoning you while pregnant and the financial power imbalance, we have grounds for a substantial settlement beyond what he's currently offering." The words transported Elise back to that painful night when Felix had revealed his ugliest thoughts, the prejudice that had lurked beneath his seeming acceptance of their differences. Yet contrasting those memories was the man who had kept vigil beside their daughter these past weeks, who had defended Elise to Serena in the coffee shop, who had brought wildflowers that spoke of remembrance and regret. "Can I think about this?" Elise asked quietly. Of course, Ellen assured her, but I should mention that Judge Marshall specifically requested this case. She has a reputation for holding powerful men accountable when they use their privilege to harm vulnerable women, particularly women of color. This is something of a specialty for her. After the call ended, Elise sat motionless, contemplating the path ahead. She could pursue justice through the courts, extract maximum financial compensation for the pain she'd endured, ensure Felix faced legal and potentially public consequences for his behavior. Judge Marshall seemed prepared to be her champion in this fight. Or she could explore the fragile possibility of healing not just for herself and Felix but for Lila, who deserved to know both her parents if possible. The reckoning Felix deserved versus the reconciliation Lila might need. The choice seemed impossible as Elise made her way back to the NICU, where both awaited her decision. Chapter 10. The Powerful Redemption. Spring arrived in New York with unexpected gentleness. After 12 weeks in the NICU, Lila Elizabeth Carver had defied medical expectations and was finally breathing independently. At 4 pounds 7 ounces, she remained smaller than full-term newborns. But the determined spark in her eyes suggested she had inherited her mother's resilience and her father's stubborn will. "She's ready to go home, Doctor," Ken announced during morning rounds. Home Elise repeated the words simultaneously thrilling and terrifying. Not that she would be truly alone. Her parents had remained in New York since arriving after Lila's birth, alerted by Felix. Despite Elise's pride, their presence had been transformative not just for Elise, but surprisingly for Felix, as well as they witnessed his unwavering commitment to Lila. As discharge day approached, the question of home became pressing. Elise's studio apartment was wholly inadequate for an infant with specialized medical needs. "You'll stay with us," her father had insisted. "We've rented a furnished apartment near the hospital." The solution seemed perfect, until Felix approached her the evening before Lila's scheduled discharge. "I've been renovating the penthouse," he explained. "Not for me, for you and Lila. Air purification systems, hospital-grade monitoring equipment, even space for a night nurse." "You expect me to move back into the penthouse after everything?" Elise asked incredulously. "I wouldn't be there," he clarified. "I've been staying at a hotel. The penthouse would be entirely yours." Before Elise could respond, she received an urgent message from her attorney. Serena Harper had filed an injunction, claiming Felix was not Lila's biological father. The court hearing was scheduled for 9:00 a.m. The next day. "This is unbelievable," Felix growled when Elise showed him the message. "I'll handle this." The emergency hearing before Judge Marshall revealed Serena's desperate attempt to interfere through fabricated evidence. After hearing both sides, the judge ordered immediate DNA testing and allowed Lila's discharge to proceed, warning Serena of potential sanctions if her allegations proved false. As expected, the DNA results confirmed Felix's paternity. Judge Marshall imposed significant sanctions against Serena, including a restraining order preventing her from approaching Elise or Lila. More significant than the legal victory was the emotional impact of standing together against an external threat. This new dynamic, equal partners defending their child, created a foundation for communication that months of hospital interactions had not. "I've decided to accept your offer," Elise told Felix after the results. "The penthouse makes the most sense for Lila's needs right now." As they prepared for discharge, Felix presented Elise with legal documents, transferring the penthouse to her name and establishing a trust for Lila's care and education. He also revealed a foundation he'd established in Lila's name to support single mothers facing medical crises during pregnancy. "Why?" Elise whispered. "You could have walked away after the DNA test." "Why all this?" "Because you taught me what matters," Felix replied, gazing at Lila. "And because I want our daughter to be proud of her father someday, even if she learns about my mistakes." Outside the hospital, reporters bombarded them with questions. Surprising everyone, Felix stopped and publicly acknowledged his failures. "Yes, I abandoned my wife when it was the worst mistake of my life, driven by insecurity and prejudice I'm deeply ashamed of." Elise, moved by his honesty, added her own statement. "We all make mistakes. The measure of a person isn't in their perfection, but in how they respond when confronted with their failures." 6 months later, Carver Enterprises faced a major crisis when journalists uncovered evidence of racial discrimination in hiring practices. Instead of agreeing to the board's proposed minimal response, Felix took a bold stance. "This isn't enough," he declared. "We're not addressing the actual problem, just managing the perception." After consulting with Elise, Felix presented a radical proposal to the board: complete restructuring of corporate leadership and policies, substantial financial investments in diversity initiatives, and his own resignation as CEO to make way for new leadership. When the board initially resisted Felix's threat to publicly resign in protest, eventually forced their compliance, he appointed Dr. Nia Coleman, a brilliant African-American executive, as his successor, remaining only as board chairman during the transition. The bold move transformed Carver Enterprises into a model for corporate accountability. Under Dr. Coleman's leadership, the company attracted diverse talent and socially conscious investors, ultimately strengthening rather than diminishing its market position. During Lila's first birthday celebration in Central Park, Elise watched Felix help their daughter take tentative steps across the grass, reflecting on their journey. "Are you happy, baby girl?" her mother asked, joining her on the picnic blanket. "I'm at peace," Elise answered thoughtfully. "Not the happily ever after I once imagined, but something real and hard-won." And Felix Margaret pressed gently. "We're finding our way," Elise replied. "Not back to what was, that's gone forever, but perhaps towards something new." Later that evening, as Felix prepared to leave, he lingered at the door. "Thank you for allowing me to be part of her life, for seeing possibility in me when you had every reason not to." Elise studied him thoughtfully. This man who had broken her heart yet worked tirelessly to atone, who had faced his worst self and chosen a different path. "Would you like to stay for dinner next Friday?" she asked suddenly. "Just dinner, friends, learning to trust again." His smile held none of his former practiced charm, only genuine joy and cautious hope. "I'd like that very much." 2 years later, both had achieved significant professional success. Elise leading the nationally recognized Leela Elizabeth Foundation advocating for maternal health, Felix implementing ethical business practices across industries. Their relationship had evolved into a deep friendship built on mutual respect and the careful reconstruction of trust. On Lila's 3rd birthday, Felix mentioned an opportunity with the National Ethics in Business Council that would require extensive travel. "I won't accept if it compromises my relationship with Lila or with you," he said, vulnerability evident in his expression. Something shifted between them, a recognition that their journey had brought them not back to their beginning but to something potentially stronger. "We could make it work," she said softly. "We've overcome harder challenges." That night, Elise wrote in Lila's journal, "My darling daughter, today you turned 3, a milestone that once seemed impossible. You've taught me that love isn't always what storybooks describe. Sometimes it's broken and rebuilt stronger at the mended places. Your father and I have learned that people can change when love matters more than pride, that reconciliation doesn't always look like fairy tales, and that forgiveness is something earned through consistent action rather than promised." In pretty words. However, our story continues to unfold. Know this: you were conceived in genuine love, fought for with everything we had, and are cherished completely by both your parents. And that is the most powerful redemption of all. As she closed the journal, Elise acknowledged the truth. Sometimes the greatest love stories aren't about perfect beginnings, but about the courage to rebuild after devastation. The path forward with Felix remained uncertain, but for the first time, she found herself open to the possibility of a new chapter, not because she needed him, but because they had both become people worthy of choosing each other.